This is a complicated video about a complicated issue with no clear heroes and villains. This is an Orthodox Mass in a destroyed church in Donetsk in 2014. It had been shelled just months ago. You can see the hole on the roof. Many other churches and monasteries were shelled at the time, mainly by Ukrainian forces. But of course the situation got worse with the Russian invasion in 2022. Many more churches ended up being destroyed by both sides. One of the reasons for that, you can see in this video, where an artillery position of the Ukrainians is placed very near a church. The destruction of churches is bad enough, but there is an even more complicated issue going on, a schism or division between the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. This got worse in 2018, when the Ukrainians decided on independence from Moscow. This is Patriarch Kirill. He's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church and a close ally of Putin. The Ukrainians, especially the more nationalist ones, did not like that and wanted their own church. So this led to all kinds of troubles, like priests who still follow the traditional church being persecuted.
Чого ви йдете? Що ви настояти?
А хто ви?
Хто ви? Чого? Священник? Якої?
Ви мене не штовхаєте. Чого ви мене впихуєте? Українське православ'я. Дозвольте. Ні, не дозволяємо. Громада не дозволяє. Чого ви мене толкаєте?
This is a priest who still follows Moscow, and a group of schismatics don't allow him to enter the church. So he celebrates Mass outside. But then they interrupt the Mass by singing the Ukrainian anthem. But perhaps this short clip can explain better what's going on.
But in January, at the request of Ukraine's president, another Orthodox leader, the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople Bartholomew, found an opportunity to officially break with the Russian Orthodox Church and sign the Ukrainian Orthodox Church back into existence. It meant the new Ukrainian Orthodox Church could now appoint and pray for its own leadership, as well as give the Ukrainian language a more prominent place in services.
What's happening is a crude interference in church affairs.
Russia's church and government have refused to recognize Bartholomew's authority in the matter.
We reserve the right to respond and do everything possible to protect human rights, including the freedom of religion.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo congratulated the head of the new church. According to the State Department, it was to underscore America's support for religious freedom and Ukrainian sovereignty. President Putin disagreed publicly.
The fact that the Secretary of State made a phone call to Kiev about this is totally out of line. It is absolutely unacceptable. Nevertheless, this is happening. And this, of course, is evidence of the fact that this is being done ahead of an election campaign with the goal of furthering the rift between the Russian and Ukrainian peoples.
For Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, the issue is a matter of political survival. He faces a hotly contested presidential election at the end of the month.
We are taking back our church.
He's put the independence of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church at the center of his campaign for re-election.
And today, a new united and independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church is born. What kind of church is it? It's a church that doesn't pray for the Russian state and the Russian army, because the Russian state and the Russian army are killing Ukrainians.
Poroshenko. This is the main guy that was pushing for this separation. Of course, in the end, he lost the election and Zelensky came in his place. Zelensky, as you know, is Jewish, so he probably doesn't care so much about the separation in the Christian church. So he seems that he didn't push for it so much. But by then, the events had already been set in motion. perhaps to fully understand what's going on, we have to go way back in time, to the Soviet period. The early communists were very much against the church, as they were atheists, and during the first decades of communism, many churches were destroyed. The Church of Christ the Savior was the largest church in Russia. In 1931, it was destroyed under orders of Stalin, with supervision by Kaganovich. First, they removed all the gold from the church and any valuables they could find. And then,
the story of the Cathedral of Christ the Savior is a bit crazy, and I normally think that if you want to understand the Russian mentality, you need to know the story of the cathedral, because it's like as controversial as it can be. It all started in the 19th century, when after the war with Napoleon they wanted to construct a big monument to commemorate this victory in this war. We're talking about the War of 1812. And it took them 44 years to construct it. And then after this time when it was finally constructed, it was here for something like 48 years. And after that, it was the Soviet time already. It was 1930s. During Soviet time, you know that they were destroying lots of churches, and they decided to destroy this one, the main Orthodox church, as a symbol of Orthodox. They wanted communism to be a new religion. So there were two explosions. And we look at this one, it's quite big. Actually, it's 103 meters, so it's a tall, very tall building. But at the place of this one, they wanted to construct, and they started the construction of so-called Palace of Soviets, which is supposed to be, attention, 300 meters tall, with 100 meter statue of Lenin at its peak.
so yes, that church was destroyed, and then a huge, horrible monument to Lenin was supposed to take its place. Ironically, what saved Moscow from this monstrosity was Hitler. With the German invasion, the Soviets could not afford to finish its construction. So eventually the plans were scrapped, and in this place was built a huge swimming pool. For many decades, it was the largest swimming pool in the world. During the war, Stalin also decided that he needed all the support he could get. So there was not so much persecution of the church as before. When communism ended, the Russian Orthodox Church experienced a rebirth. And in 1994, the Church of Christ the Savior was rebuilt. Here is where Putin celebrated Easter this year. This is also where feminist group Pussy Riot had their protest in 2012. There are of course other religious divisions in Ukraine. There is a significant Catholic minority in the west, around Lvov or Lviv. They are actually mostly not following the Latin Rite, but what's called the Eastern Rite or Byzantine Rite. But they still follow the Pope, and Orthodox and Catholics don't always get along. Also, if anything, Catholics were even more persecuted than the Orthodox during communism. This is a former Catholic church near Odessa, built in 1901. It was transformed into a club after the revolution, and Soviet slogans were painted on the walls. Then another building was created for the club, and the church just fell into disrepair.
Odessa was once home to one of the most powerful Jewish communities in all of Europe.
Then you have the Jews. Zelensky is not the only Jewish person in the country. At the beginning of the century, there used to be 2 or even 3 million Jews in the Ukraine, many of them located in the Odessa area. And initially, many of them were big supporters of communism. But the war, then the German invasion, and of course other factors led many of them to immigrate. After the creation of the State of Israel, most of them moved there. And now with the current war, many more left too. So perhaps the current population is only between 100,000 to 300,000 Jewish people. But you still have some oligarchs such as Kolomoisky, who still has a lot of influence there. And then, of course, you have other smaller religions. There is also a Mormon church in Kiev, and also some evangelic or charismatic churches with strange rituals, which also seem aligned with the nationalists.
Это моя страна, здесь мой дом, да, здесь моя родина. Верю в ее будущее, помню ее прошлое.
So yeah, some strange alliances going on.
At the end of his general audience, Pope Francis received a pair of special visitors. A translator explained to the Pope that the husbands of these two Ukrainian women are fighting in Mariupol. The Pope stood up despite his knee pain to show his respect. Their husbands are part of the famous Azov regiment, the same one currently barricaded in the Azovstal steelworks.
This guy on the right is Pyotr Verzilov, one of the founders of the feminist and pro-abortion group Pussy Riot. So yeah, strange alliances indeed. There's nothing necessarily wrong with nationalism, and in some ways it is understandable as a reaction against Soviet domination. But in many ways, the current war is the result of the intolerance of a certain faction of Ukrainian nationalists against the populations of the East, which for several geographical and historical reasons has more cultural affinities and even family ties with Russia than with the west of the Ukraine. And so many of them support Russia or the DPR in the current war. But even they have suffered with all the destruction.
И аптеки, и больницы, и школы.
Люди мертвые выносили в садике, лежат, никто не хоронит, там эпидемия будет через неделю.